sexuality education is not intersectional, it likely only reinforces the power and privilege that already exist in our society. So, when talking about body image, for example, it's important to think about how ethnic, racial, and religious differences may impact how people view their bodies. When talking about abortion, it's essential to talk about the political and cultural barriers that interrupt its availability. When talking about pleasure, we need to acknowledge the sexism that has caused female pleasure to be valued less than male pleasure. When talking about pornography, we can also talk about how it may fetishize certain groups of people. One of the things that has changed in the past decade, and you won't be surprised by this, is the amount of information that is available to young people today and the easy accessibility of that information. Technology in the classroom and at home has progressed to the point where the world is truly at young people's fingertips, even though young people's brains aren't necessarily equipped to handle that much information. They need help discerning what information will actually be helpful to them and what will lead them into trouble. Our job today, whether as educators or parents, entails talking more about media literacy, about how to assess the validity of information, and about looking at the sources of information and their biases and values. Teenagers today likely don't need us to tell them how sperm cells form or what sexual intercourse is, but they do need help figuring out how to access that information and to determine what information exists for their benefit and what is trying to steer them away from authenticity and truth. Another thing that's changed over the past decade is the process of identity formation. Whether we think this is a positive change or not, young people today have many more options to consider than simply whether they feel like a boy or a girl and whether they are gay, straight, or bisexual. Our understanding of both gender identity and sexual romantic orientation has greatly expanded over the past 10 years, and we have an ever-increasing list of labels one can use to describe oneself. To me, this is a great benefit because it allows young people to find a more precise way to describe their own experience. What it has also brought about is greater latitude in experimenting with different identities. It's not uncommon today for young people to try out different labels, different pronouns, and different relationships in search of their truth. This can be quite jarring for adults who had fewer options and were taught that identity, once established, was unchanging. I've had a lot of talks with parents and caregivers over the past decade about how it's perfectly normal for teens, and even younger kids, to shift how they think of themselves and how they label themselves. Yes, there certainly still are people who establish an identity early in life and don't shift, but the possibility of changes in both language and behavior is not uncommon today and shouldn't be looked at as a sign of confusion or a problem. Yet, amidst all this, being a teen is still being a teen. Humans have pretty consistent developmental needs and go through developmental phases that don't seem to be radically affected by time or social tumult. I'm always amazed at how my students have the same questions year after year. This is actually good news for educators and adults who want to help kids. We can predict what needs a young person has, and we get the chance to work at serving those needs more and more successfully as time passes. I'm a much better teacher of teenagers than I was 10 years ago because I've had 10 more years of practice working with them. I feel for parents and caregivers who often only get 1 or 2 chances to work through raising a teenager. Over the years at my school, almost 400 students have taken my sexuality and society class. That's 400 amazing, unique, funny, frustrating, charming, fumbling, and brave kids. How privileged I feel to be able to have so many opportunities to try to be a helpful presence in young people's lives. Good sexuality education is age-appropriate, medically accurate, value-explicit, honest, joyful, intersectional, communal, and accessible to all learners. It's a natural extension of the education necessary to be a positive, helpful member of society.